thing we're going to talk about when it comes to friendship is the notion of popularity. Popularity can be measured in lots of different ways, but for the purposes of this class, we're going to talk about sociometric nominations. This is when we get kids, whether in elementary, middle school, or high school, to name 3 people in their class, in their homeroom, in their grade level that they like, and 3 people they dislike. Or 3 people they want to spend time with, and 3 people they don't want to spend time with. And what we find is there's certain patterns that emerge. Just like the backyard garden, there's some kids that are very liked by others. They get many nominations for someone lots of kids want to spend time with, and few dislikes, few negative nominations. These kids are considered popular. This may not be the popular definition you're familiar with, but these are the really likable kids. Maybe the kids that are good at cooperation, or are just trustworthy kids, or just good-hearted people. And we can think about these as the butterfly. Everybody likes butterflies. Few people would say they dislike butterflies. But then there's the kids that are rejected. These are the kids that receive many dislikes and very few likes. And so these are the kids that everybody, when they think of someone they don't want to spend time with, they come to mind. They say, that's a person I don't like. And very few people think of them as someone they want to spend time with. These could be the equivalent to mosquitoes. Many people dislike mosquitoes, and I personally don't know anyone who does like mosquitoes. But then we have the kids that receive many positive nominations and many negative nominations. Lots of people say they like them and appreciate them, but a lot of people also say they dislike them and avoid them. And these are the controversial kids. These tend to be the more high status kids, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. These tend to be the kids that really make an impression on others, but that impression is very controversial. We can think about them as bumblebees. Bees are important, and lots of people appreciate the work that bees do and think of bees in a very positive fashion, but lots of other people really don't like bees and really want to stay away from them. So they could be controversial. And then we have those who don't receive any nominations. They may not have enemies. They may not have anyone think about them as someone they dislike. In fact, they might be actively disliked by no one. But they're also actively liked by very few people. Few people would name them when they think about their friends. And in school, these are the neglected kids. These are the kids that just walk the halls like a ghost. No one notices them. And if they didn't go to school, no one would even notice. These may be the creatures in your backyard you think the least about. Maybe that's an earthworm. You don't think much about the earthworm, you don't really like it, you don't really dislike it, you have no opinion on it. And that could be the neglected child. Now, whereas the majority of us, well, most of us are going to fall in the average category, where we don't receive many nominations and we don't receive few nominations. It's just somewhere in the middle. And that might be how some of us might like or dislike spiders or ladybugs or slugs, or just somewhere else in the middle. Now, what we can do with these stats is we can look at the impact and the status. What we can find is most people like the popular and the controversial in the middle, with the rejected and neglected being the ones on the outskirts. But we can also just add up the total number of nominations to get someone's social status. And when we add up the total number of nominations, we find those controversial kids are really on top. They're really the influencers. They can really set the trends and be the school leaders. And I mentioned they were the bees, and that's because they can be the queen bees. They can be at the top of the social pecking order when it comes to how they influence the hierarchies within their school. So they're considered to be high impact. Their behaviors, the motives they get behind, the social issues they raise in school can get a lot of attention. And the activities they engage with can become more popular. If they play football, or they're one of the people that like to fix up cars in shop class, or they're on the band, they can make that seem more cool or less cool based on what they do. And the other kids tend to follow them more often. So that's how we tend to look at popularity. Now, aside from these friendship groups, we also have to talk about social skills. This is our social development unit, and social skills are a lot harder for us to track down and figure out than some of our cognitive skills, but we do find there tends to be 3 clusters of how these skills emerge. For instance, we tend to find that during free play, and even in not so free play, most individuals tend to follow one of 3 categories. They either move towards others, move away from others, or move against others. And we can find them in 3 clusters that a lot of developmental psychologists call being the aggressive, the shy, or the prosocial child, or teen, or adult. So moving against, that really represents the aggressive individual. And aggression is super complex. We could have an entire course just on aggression. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to divide into two subcategories. There's physical aggression and social aggression. And physical aggression is exactly what it sounds like. It's the hitting, the smashing of either another person or property. This includes throwing a controller across the room or breaking a glass. And it could also be intimidation. It could also be threats. Maybe you don't actually hit someone, but you raise a fist like you're going to. It can also be really forceful yelling and screaming that sounds intimidating. And so physical aggression is about physically overpowering and over-dominating someone. And it's very overt, it's obvious, we can see it at the surface. In comparison, social aggression is more covert and more hidden. It tends to be something that is more reliant on rumors, or exclusion, or withholding friendship, not inviting someone to a party, or gossiping about someone. And this can be harder to track. This could be little snide comments or eye glances. It can be direct and face-to-face with someone, calling someone a threat and alleging something against them that will hurt their friendships. Or it could be much more secretive, like posting something anonymous online. So social aggression tends to be more common in girls, and physical aggression tends to be more common in boys. But there's also many other predictors. Some of the predictors of who's going to be more aggressive has to do with their parents. We know that kids of more authoritarian parents tend to be more physically aggressive. And that's because that obedience metric and top-down authority, they really learn to get ahead, they have to dominate over others. And whether that's with their fists or with their words, that's what they learn. We also know that physically aggressive kids tend to have a temperament style that is more high in activity and low in mood. They just tend to get frustrated more often. And the physically aggressive kids tend to have more poorly developed communication skills, or maybe they can't use their words to explain their frustration, so they use their bodies. Physically aggressive kids tend to also lack perspective-taking skills and coping strategies. Now, in comparison, I don't have it on the slide, but socially aggressive kids actually tend to have superior perspective-taking skills. And this is because they have to take the perspective of their victim as well as perspectives of their parents and their teachers so they don't get caught and so they can remain covert. The motivation to be socially aggressive tends to be a lot more nuanced than being physically aggressive. And we're still trying to determine that in the literature. It's still a controversial area. We are worried about both the socially and the physically aggressive kids, though. Whether they're physically or socially aggressive, there tends to be an increased risk for peer rejection. With physical aggression, it's the idea that if you're physically aggressive, other kids will reject you and not want to be around you, much like the mosquito. But a socially aggressive kid might actually become the queen bee, might actually be the controversial person to a point. And then they might fall from grace and become rejected. Some socially aggressive people never become rejected, but they just internalize this really negative perception of relationships. And their attachment style is such that they don't really trust anyone. They have more of that avoidant, dismissive attachment style where they believe all relationships are a vulnerability and everyone's always going to be playing mind games with everyone. So they're going to suffer in that way. The physically aggressive kids are more at risk for academic problems, for delinquency and involved in crime, and they may also need to be referred to anger management because they're just more hostile. Versus the socially aggressive kids might have a hard time finding long-term positive relationships and might have a hard time understanding how to build a positive relationship moving forward. So it's something that we're definitely concerned about, and it's something that continues to get a ton of research. Now, something that has historically had less research than aggression, but has definitely changed in the last 30 years, is the study of shyness. And so some kids are not moving against others, they're moving away from others. And these are our shy or socially inhibited or socially withdrawn kids. What we tend to see happen is they say less words, they tend to be more quiet, they tend to be very nervous when they're in social situations, and they might try to spend more time alone, but it might not be that solitary engaged play we talked about. It might actually be that solitary reticent play, where they actually want to be in the group, and they're not happy being alone. They're very lonely, actually, but they're too shy and too socially awkward to invite themselves to play with others. What happens here is if we have a helicopter parent who does all the speaking for their child, they never really get the communication skills to invite themselves. Or if we have a parent who's very anxious and they make their child believe that others are out to get them or they have to do everything to please others, the child will internalize that and become shy. And so the biggest predictors tend to be born with a bit more of a faster racing heart rate or higher cortisol and stress hormone level, and also having anxious parents. Now, some individuals who are born shy do fine. They might find a few outgoing friends and everything's okay. Shyness in and of itself is not necessarily a problem, but it does increase our risks for having some other problems. We know some individuals who are shy, they tend to experience much more anxiety, much more depression, and much more loneliness. They also may go on to have a lower self-esteem or they just don't believe in themselves. And because they're shy, if they form a friendship with another shy individual, both of them don't tend to talk as much, they don't tend to disclose or be emotionally intimate with each other, and so they might have a lower quality friendship because of that lack of bonding and lack of disclosure. Now finally, our last group, rather than moving against or away, we're going to talk about the kids that are moving towards others. And these are the kids often described as being prosocial. These are the kids that understand it's important to be assertive, not aggressive, not passive, but assertive and helpful and altruistic. These are the kids that really understand cooperation. And what happens here is these are usually the kids of our authoritative, our more flexible democratic parents who model these good communication and good relationship skills. These kids also have good emotional development. They can regulate their emotions, they have more positive self-esteem, and they tend to be able to focus on the needs of others around them and see themselves as part of the larger picture. What happens here is good things. The prosocial kids tend to go on to make more friends, tend to have more high quality friendships, and they tend to overachieve. These are also our kids more likely to receive more likes than dislikes and to be the butterfly when it comes to popularity. And so social development is a massive field, and this was really just scraping the surface, but I hope you enjoyed Unit 7. You've now reached the end. Well done.